I've always been a huge fan of the front-engined, rear-drive, high-performance car. I don't know why, I've just always thought of them as a little bit more sophisticated, perhaps, than their mid-engine brethren. And top of the tree, apart from the Ford Escort Mark II, for obvious reasons, has to be the Ferrari V12. Just think of that fabulous dynasty, everything from a 250 GTO through short wheelbase, all the way up to the modern mad cars like the F12 and the 812 Superfast. Over the years, I've been lucky enough to drive everything pretty much from 599 onwards, but earlier than that, well, there were a few gaps. So over the course of the next 2 films, I'm going to put some of that right with the help of these 2 lovely cars.
Despite production of the Daytona ending in 1973 and the 550 Maranello not starting production until 1996, this duo are actually sequential in the Ferrari front-engine 2-seat lineage. There were just a couple of decades where mid-engined was all the rage. These 2 cars, by the way, have been kindly loaned to us by Bell Sport and Classic, who you may remember created that fabulous 330 LMB. Anyway, back to these 2, and we're taking them in chronological order, so it's the Daytona up first.
Let's start with the name, because I've been calling this Daytona, but officially Ferrari calls this the 365 GTB4. Just trips off the tongue, doesn't it? It got the name Daytona really from the press or media, because when this was unveiled in Paris in 1968, they said, well, it's called Daytona in honour of the victory in 1967, where Ferrari had a 1-2-3 finish at Daytona. I have heard that Ferrari was going to call this Daytona, but didn't like the fact that the press had sort of leaked it or got wind of the name, so they just reverted to 365 GTB4. Something else that always used to confuse me when I was little, I couldn't sort of work out whether it was the same car or not. Perhaps this Daytona and 365 were different cars, and something that I think kind of sort of confused me as well is that they have different lights. So early ones, in fact, didn't look like this because they had a clear section across here for the headlights, and the pop-up headlights only came later because of a ruling in the USA. This car is from 1971 in Rosso Chiaro, and it's one of, well, around about 150 right-hand drive UK cars. Fewer than 1,300 Daytonas were produced overall. The design by Fioraventi, who designed the Dino and then went on to design the 308, 288 GTO and the F40, in fact. It's a design that, well, it was very modern for Ferrari at the time. Obviously you've got the sort of the pointy front end, that cam tail at the rear just sliced off. This is very much a transitional design, something which you can see from the wheels. So these are the 5-star, 5-spoke wheels which you came to know and recognise through many subsequent cars, right up in fact to the 550 up there, which you can still see sort of the echoes of this design in, but this was available as an option with Barani spoked wheels as well, just showing that it sort of still harked back a little bit to the 275 before. Talking of lights, I've always loved this in here, sort of moulded in with the Prancing Horse on it. Anyway, let's have a chat about the heart of the car, that V12.
It's a dry-sumped 4.4 litre 4-cam version of the famous Colombo V12. There are 6 Weber carburettors, and it puts out 347 brake horsepower at 7,500 RPM and 318 pounds-foot of torque at 5,500 RPM. Supplying its thirst is a 128 litre or 28 gallon fuel tank. Right, let's have a look inside.
I've never even sat in a Daytona before, and wow, it's a fabulous thing. The first thing that strikes me is that just how low you feel like you sit, actually, because I think looking at this car in profile, it always looks like it sort of rides quite high, particularly sort of within the wheelbase. It looks like it's quite high off the ground, but you sit in this and you're really down in. That bonnet basically sort of disappears. I can see it just over on this side, sort of, you've got a bit of a reference point there, but otherwise it's quite a sort of a high dash and you're really sort of low in it with this fabulous array of Veglia dials in front of you. It's quite a big dashboard like that. All the materials in here, the smell, the soft leather, anything from this era or before obviously has a great feel to it. And I love this gearbox. Obviously you've got the open gate down here, but it's sort of canted over in there, which I've never noticed before. So then you've got the radio, the Blaupunkt radio in this, which is mounted, well, curiously I suppose, like that. Obviously then the slider switches up here and that sort of thing. It's really cool. This wheel canted away from you a bit as well. It's just a cool interior. Talking of cool, something that I think gave this car some of its real cool in period is it won the 1971 Cannonball Run from New York to LA, nearly 3,000 miles at an average of just over 80 miles an hour. Dan Gurney and Brock Yates were at the wheel, and Dan Gurney famously quipped afterwards that they never once exceeded 175 miles an hour. That's because, well, when Autocar tested this, it would actually only do 174 miles an hour, which was certainly fast enough in period. Talking of which, I think we should go for a drive, see what it feels like today.
Out on the road, even today, it initially feels like quite a big car, probably because you're aware of all that acreage of bonnet disappearing up front.
No wing mirrors either. Adds to the sleek look though. The driving position as well is, well, quite Italian, very 70s I think somehow, pretty louche, just laid back like this, the wheel tilted away from you feels a bit odd, but actually once you sort of settle into it, it's quite nice. This particular car actually has one of the very few options that you can get, which is air conditioning. Quite nice on these warmer days. Instantly makes you want to do a long journey. It doesn't give you that sort of any sporting pretensions from the get-go. Doesn't give you many sporting pretensions in the corners either. The steering is really heavy at low speed, and then not particularly precise, I have to say, in the corners either. What a sense of occasion in this car though. I love having the open gated gearbox. Really nice shift actually, sort of much longer lever than you're used to in modern Ferraris, or in the sort of the later open gated Ferraris, as we'll see in the 550. But a lovely shift. Dog leg obviously, so you have to remember that when going back to first. Like any old Ferrari, it definitely gets better the more time you spend in it, the more it warms up. It comes to you, it comes alive. And I've always rather liked that, the fact that it feels like very much a living creature. In terms of claim performance, well, Autocar figured one of these at 5.4 seconds to 60 miles an hour, and then they measured one at 174 miles an hour flat out. And there's definitely performance there in this big Colombo V12. We'll obviously come to the 550 in the next film. I wouldn't say this is only a second slower than that though. Although obviously that Daytona name isn't official, I feel like it does kind of suit this car, because it feels like a car that you want to go across America in, settle into long straight roads, perhaps not quite as quickly as Brock Yates and Dan Gurney, but nonetheless I feel like that's where this will be really at home. For all that the steering on this does feel perhaps not as precise as I might hope, because this is front engine, rear drive, transaxle layout, I instantly feel happier, more confident in this than I did in the Miura that I drove some years ago now. It might not be quite as glamorous as that, but I think this is probably better to drive.
Perhaps I'm being unfair to the Lamborghini, but I think the inherent balance of the front-engine Daytona means it is instinctively friendlier. In terms of suspension, there are unequal length wishbones all round and anti-roll bars front and rear, with the Michelins giving that lovely distinctive tall sidewall feel in the corners.
It doesn't feel like the most sporting GT or the most sporting front-engined rear drive car I've ever driven, but I can see why people like these.
There is a long-legged weightiness to the demeanour of the Daytona which is distinct from almost any other Ferrari I've driven. It's certainly the polar opposite of the slightly flighty, alert character of modern models. It hasn't raced to the top of my personal favourites, but I'm now even more intrigued to find out where its successor, the 550 Maranello, fits into the picture. But that's for next time.